Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. It is Sunday, October, what is it, 18th? And I'm Sandy Schoelles, and Nicholas Humphrey's with us, and Jennifer Hynes. And
Hi, guys.
yeah,
Hi.
hi. I'm just trying to fix this stuff. Listen, tonight, everyone, while your people are joining us, we're going through a few things. First, I'm going to tell you about we're going to play a clip. It's an 8-minute clip, but it's from the mainstream media, friends. And this is kind of it's from this morning. And then Jennifer, what are you going to go through? I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, we can go through the Arctic sea ice graphs. We can go
Yep.
through Nicholas Humphrey. He's going to do his piece that he's just recently written for Patreon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a couple of other articles we can go through, guys. There's one from the Barents Observer, and it's called "There Was No Ice on the Water," says Captain of Tall Ship Sadov about
Yeah.
Arctic voyage. So this is about the dying of the Arctic sea ice. We have an article about the El Nino that's setting in and how that is going to affect the hurricane season in the Pacific. That's exceptional cooling continues in the equatorial Pacific. La Nina, excuse me, now gradually intensifies in time for winter. And then I guess we've got that clip that you're about to show us, Sandy. That 8-minute clip.
Yes, we do. And I am just going to set that up. And yeah, I wanted to pull up the Barents Sea one, because that's a good one. So, all right. So what I'm going to do, guys, is while you're all joining, this is from this morning. The newest, hot off the presses from United States television, from the show, what is it, Sunday Morning? So enjoy this. We're going to give you the 8 minutes while we stretch a little, and we'll be back. But please watch it, because David Wallace Wells is in this, and I was kind of surprised. Then we're going to talk about it after. So here we go. It's called Cause for Concern.
One wildfire after another, and a hurricane season for the record books. Cause for concern, says our David Pogue, who reports our cover story.
Authorities believe the virus originated here at the large Wuhan seafood and animal market.
The CDC is on guard.
Experts worry it could become a pandemic.
2020 has been a year of non-stop crises.
The coronavirus has infected Wall Street.
Some wore masks as protection from one epidemic while demanding an end to another.
For a while there, it was almost possible to forget an ongoing crisis that used to have our attention: climate change.
Parts of Newport Beach are flooded tonight.
But nature found a way to remind us. In the Midwest, punishing 100-mile-an-hour winds. In the Southwest, a brutal succession of floods and droughts. On the coasts,
Delta is bearing down on the Louisiana Gulf Coast.
A freakish number of devastating hurricanes. And in our western states,
the combination of the high heat and dry brush makes for explosive fires.
Historic mega fires that sent a plume of ash and smoke all the way to the East Coast. More than 4 million acres have burned in California alone.
Just to put that into perspective, that is larger than the state of Connecticut, and these fires are still burning.
Chief Daniel Berlant is an assistant deputy director for CAL FIRE, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection.
Our climate here in California has been changing now for decades. In fact, this year's fire seasons are on average 75 days longer than they were in the 70s.
Where are we in the fire season right now?
This year's fire season will likely just roll right into 2021.
So this ain't over yet.
There is no end in sight.
In the last 20 years, we've experienced twice the number of weather disasters as we did in the previous 20 years. The cost so far, about $3 trillion. Yes, climate change is back in the headlines.
We always put climate change on the back burner as something we can deal with later, but we're out of time for that. There is no later. We need to deal with it now.
Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson is a marine biologist, policy expert, and co-editor of All We Can Save, a book of essays by women climate leaders. I asked her for a climate change refresher.
We burn all these fossil fuels, all these greenhouse gases go up in the air. It's carbon dioxide, it's methane, and they create this layer of gases that's basically like a blanket on top of the planet.
That blanket traps heat from the sun that would have bounced back out into space.
It's funny we call it the greenhouse effect because most people don't spend a lot of time hanging out in greenhouses.
I think it should be called the dog in the car in summer effect.
Ooh, totally.
Because isn't it the same thing? The sun comes into the car, it doesn't fully bounce out, so the car gets really hot inside.
That's a much better analogy.
The planet is now warmer than in the entire history of human civilization. It's like we've landed on a new planet with a new set of climate conditions, and we have to figure out what of the civilization that we've brought with us to this point can survive these conditions.
David Wallace Wells is the deputy editor of New York Magazine and the author of The Uninhabitable Earth, a book that explores what will happen if we don't cut our carbon emissions soon. He says it's not just about warmer weather.
It changes the whole system. Rainstorms are going to be more intense. The oceans are heating up, which means that hurricanes are going to become more intense and more frequent, as they already are. They're going to be extreme droughts, as well as extreme rainfalls. It's just a kind of a scrambling of what had been a very stable system on which we've erected all of human civilization.
And it's not just unstable weather. It's unstable us.
Agricultural yields could fall by half or more over the course of the century if we don't change course. It affects respiratory illnesses, cancer, it affects cognitive performance, development of children.
If you've been paying attention, none of this is news. What is new is that public opinion about the climate crisis is finally changing.
So when you see these headlines, 70% of Americans are now at least mildly curious. That's not something to brag about. It still seems really low to me.
To me, something like 70 or 75% of the country expressing concern about an issue seems really high. We live in an incredibly polarized world where most of these issues, if you can nudge it past 50%, you're doing incredibly well.
So what took us so long to become alarmed?
Until quite recently, people didn't see the effects in their lives. I think almost no one now can look at their TV screens and think to themselves, climate change isn't real.
The federal government has done virtually nothing about climate change in the last few years, but in many ways, the country has marched right ahead anyway. The mayors of 438 cities, the governors of 25 states, and 700 universities have committed to cutting their emissions, mostly in line with the Paris Agreement. That's the 2016 international commitment to limit the Earth's heating up to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or less in the next 80 years.
About 1,000 major corporations have pledged to cut their emissions to Paris Agreement levels too. And why would corporations go green? Because of public pressure, investor pressure, and employee pressure. Technology has been marching on too. For example, these babies. Direct air capture machines, huge fans that extract carbon dioxide back out of the air. From there, the plan is to store it underground, turn it into fuels or building materials, or even sell it to carbonated drink companies.
They can take carbon out of the atmosphere at a cost of about $100 a ton. That's much more expensive than it would cost to not put carbon up there in the first place. Those prices will probably fall further.
11 of these plants are already operating as pilot projects.
Now, you don't want to use these to solve the whole problem because, among other things, it would mean essentially barnacling the whole planet with plantations of carbon capture machines. But I do think that there is a role for carbon capture.
Whatever steps we take, we'll have to take them fairly. Research shows that extreme weather hits hardest in low-income areas and communities of color.
It's people in low-lying areas, people near waterfronts that aren't protected, but also people who don't have the resources to leave. Everyone in Hurricane Katrina who was trying to get out of New Orleans couldn't. A lot of people didn't have cars. It's often a privilege to get to leave before a storm.
All over the world, we're building some of the most expensive public works projects in human history. Defenses against rising sea levels and flooding from intense rains. And in New York
is so valuable that we're going to have to protect it. And so there are a variety of plans that are already in place, but there are also much more ambitious plans that haven't yet gotten greenlit to enclose the entire harbor in a seawall. That would cost hundreds of billions of dollars.
So there's some good news. More people are talking about the climate crisis. More countries are doing something about it, even China. And last year, for the first time, the price of clean renewable energy fell below the price of burning coal.
On the other hand, we're getting started far too late. I asked David Wallace Wells if the latest developments give him any hope.
So if you're hoping to preserve the planet of our grandparents, there's no reason for hope. If you're hoping to preserve the climate as we know it today, there's really no reason for hope there either. But I think that the worst case scenarios are getting considerably less likely because a lot of this action has taken place, a lot of the political momentum that we're seeing.
We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction.
Scientists like Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson are more skeptical.
I don't really think of myself as an optimist, but as a realist. So much of this change is already baked in. Things are really dire, but I'm also not giving up. And honestly, like, who are we to give up? We have to try.
Well, I thought that was pretty good for something that was going out to mainstream America. You know, what about you, Jen?
Absolutely. You know,
like
I
the piece?
recently got I did, and I recently got an offer to speak to a group of high school students, seniors,
That's great.
here in Colorado, in a mostly Republican district, which is going to be interesting. And I'm thinking of possibly compiling a list of different things. What can I tell these guys in an hour about climate change? You know, all I can do is possibly ignite their curiosity and their passion to go and start looking and discover it for themselves. Because, you know, the young people of this earth, they're the ones that are going to be shouldering this burden, you know, as they grow into their maturity.
Yeah, well, there are some links, though, actually, if you want them. I found when I was doing some research, there are some links on that subject of topics to kind of slide younger people in, but you know, it was interesting. It was I don't know, I was doing one of my videos, but anyway, let's welcome Nick, because we have, you know, we can sit here and blab all night. Nick's here. So let's say hi, Nick. Hi, Nick. Yes, welcome.
It's so good to have you tonight, Nick.
Yeah.
No, thanks for having me.
Well, I thought we would start out with showing the piece that you you wrote. That's absolutely excellent. And I don't know if we'll, you know, actually read the whole thing. Let me pull it up. And okay, let's see. Everybody see it? All right. This is Nick's Facebook page. And Nick, why don't you tell us and talk about what inspired you on this piece when you were writing, and maybe you want to go over a little bit of it. Why don't you take the floor?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I was sitting at my computer trying to think of something to write, just to stay in contact with people, and then I realized I've been, you know, everything that's been happening, and so I asked the question, who else is dealing with a bit of foreboding and dread about the future? You know, because we're starting to see all of these signs of collapse happening. You know, collapse economically, collapse socially, collapse politically, in terms of people's health, you know, collapse in that sense too. So, I mean, in the piece I wrote about, you know, the fact that we're dealing with this pandemic, COVID-19, that doesn't seem to have an end, particularly in the U.S. and you know, and it's going to get worse in the next, you know, 60 to 90 days for our country because of the fall and winter season, and I sort of asked the question, you know, what other pandemics await us in the years to come as we lose more tropical rainforests and the permafrost melts, and you're starting to destroy organic material and organic matter that may contain ancient viruses and bacteria that humans haven't been exposed to. You release that into the larger environment when those kind of features are destroyed. And you know, sort of thinking about the future, that this this once in 100-year pandemic may not be the worst one that we face in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Never know. It could be something else coming down the pike. And then I also thought about the election, and Donald Trump, short of being blown out in the election, he's going to try to challenge it and to stay in power. And that could involve using the judicial system, that could involve his enabling political party. Frankly, they don't throw him out. The Republican Party, they support him all the time. And also these racist militias that are running around threatening politicians like the Governor Whitmer of Michigan, and the governor of Virginia, I think, had a threat against them. And this could be more of a normal thing that happens if there's any doubt or any way to create doubt in the election. Trump will take advantage of that because he wants to stay in power. He likes power, and he likes not being in prison.
Yeah. Oh, we would think, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, and then I went on and talked about the obvious biggest thing that we're facing is climate change, and the sea ice is not freezing, and the fires are going on in the West Coast and Colorado and in the Amazon rainforest, and obviously, as I mentioned, the permafrost is melting. There's all these things happening all at one time that are cascading and they're happening faster and going faster into the future. I kind of reflected on things that are happening now. There are things that are positive that are happening in terms of my personal life, in terms of the people around me. I got a new job. I haven't caught COVID.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. But this is the collapse that we've been worried about all of these years. It's really starting to show itself in real time, I think. The collapse of civilization, really, and all of the things that are tied to civilization: economics, politics, social interactions. I mean, people are fighting over wearing a mask now in a pandemic.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, there's just crazy things going on. So that's basically the gist of what I wrote and why I wrote it. It just it came out sort of spontaneously as my my fears for the future are coming up.
Well, it was really, I read it, and it was funny how you put it up, and then I happened to be just laying there with my phone, and I get the notifications from you. It popped up, and you were on. You said, "Oh my God, I just put that up 12 minutes ago," and I was already like, "Oh, this is our show, Nick. We're using it for the show." Absolutely. Oh yeah, definitely. So, I'll show it one more time. I put up a couple of little funnies while you were talking for people to to look at.
I'm looking at
I particularly like this one of the ocean. It fits our page with Trump running from the ocean.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yes, you can
wow.
run, but you can't hide. That wave's going to get you, Trump.
Yeah, actually, you are
It
right
was
there,
fake.
Jennifer. So I
Yeah.
guess we should segue into the fabulous graphs. And I don't know who wants to talk about Zach Labe and his work
Well,
first.
I think
but,
it's too good. We have
boy.
to share it. We can't just have one person talking about this.
Okay.
I love the first animation that you've got there. I don't know if you've got that up on the screen right now, Sandy, but the one that moves, it says
Let's hope
Arctic
it
sea
does.
ice, and it's the extent of the Arctic sea ice. And it
Oh, it's
shows,
working.
of course, all of the, from the 1980s mean, the 1990s, the 2000s, then 2019. And of course, the white line is 2012, because that was the low Arctic sea ice extent historically. But if you look at how this animation is playing out and where we are in current time, we are right there, the red line, and about to go out of all the minimums that have previously been set, because the Arctic sea ice is having a harder time melting this year. Every year it's a little tougher for the Arctic sea ice to melt, and this year, oh my God, as we go through these graphs, we'll be able to see which seas in particular in the Arctic Sea, the Arctic Ocean, are not melting as they should. So what's your feelings about this graph, Nick?
Yeah, it's been a pattern where it's just it's not just about the seasonal minimum, although that obviously is the big deal, and it was the second lowest on record this year for the seasonal minimum in September, just behind 2012. But it's the refreezing. It's taking a lot longer for the ice to reform, to refreeze, and we'll go into the other graphs here in a minute, but it's really bad in the Siberian side of the Arctic Ocean. But I mean, it's an ongoing pattern for years now, where it gets so warm in the open Arctic Ocean that the ice just does not have an easy time forming as you go into October and November. At some point, it always does reform, but it sits near record or at record lows, and that's what it is right now. It's in record territory in the Arctic Ocean.
Torstein said we could go lowest for the 2020 average going south, lowest for the 2020 average.
Oh, probably for was it for extent or for volume? I could see that for volume even.
Well, even extent, Nick. Even just scroll down once, Sandy, past that graph into the next graph.
Gotcha.
And what I want to point out is this the one that says Arctic sea ice extent, and it's got those 5 lines? Okay. We are the orange kind of yellow line, and we currently are at the record low for extent. Now, for volume, we're way low. We're way at the record extent, or the record low volume, because the volume is, the Arctic sea ice keeps getting thinner and thinner every single year. And so not only are we low for volume, which we knew we would be, but we are also low for extent. So, it's shriveling away, before our very eyes. And the consequences on the jet stream cannot be understated. The jet stream is already a wreck, leading to all the abrupt climate change events that we've been seeing around the world. But as soon as the Arctic sea ice goes, the only cool body up in the Arctic Ocean is going to be Greenland. And that's really where everything's going to shift. And there's going to be swirling around Greenland. And that's going to be the last of the cold spot, pretty much, up in the Arctic.
Yeah, and most people don't realize how serious this is. Nobody does. You talk to them and they glaze over, oh, the Arctic, okay, and then they'll hear that, well, then shipping routes will be easier, and bullshit stuff. It makes me sick.
Yeah, it's all about making money.
Oh,
it is
my
the
God.
cha-ching.
It's easier.
Yeah.
Cha-ching.
It always
Cha-ching.
of it all. The cha-ching of it all. My God.
Which the thing is if you have the jet stream or the polar vortex shifting more over Greenland, that's gonna mean you're gonna have a jet stream pattern that sends storms more easily from the Atlantic into the Arctic. It Atlantifies the Arctic Ocean region.
God.
You get all the storminess, and that will also limit sea ice from growing in the Arctic Ocean too, and you'll have to deal with bigger storms and everything else, and that has implications for erosion and destruction of coastal permafrost in Alaska and Siberia. That's already forcing some communities in Alaska to move because a reduction of ice means greater erosion of the landscape, because you're getting all these big waves that hit that hit the land and aren't muted by having surface ice there to protect the landmass, and so you have like rapid erosion, and coastal communities have to move. They can't be where they used to be.
Human
It's
says,
so
so do we need a
true.
rebellion? Do we need a rebellion? Yeah, we need a rebellion. All right. I don't know. I think the younger people are, they've got, well, you're the younger person. I mean, the writing is on the wall. I mean, the people are out there. So I don't see it ending. And it might be for civil rights, but I think it's going to be for climate rights.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see, like, because I'm closer to 40 than to 30 now.
Okay, all right.
Oh,
Well,
you're
when I
getting
met you,
so
Yeah.
old.
yeah.
I'm not a 16-year-old, and I think for like the Greta Thunberg type people, this is really like an existential thing for them, because they haven't really had a chance to be an adult yet, even. And
Right.
if they wake up to this as a teenager or a young adult, like 21, 22 years old or whatever, then they see the seriousness of the crisis, I think, in a big way. And I mean, that's why they tend to be, right now, they tend to be the most politically progressive people, more than my group 30s, 40s, and obviously far more than folks in their 60s, 70s, 80s. They have to be, because it's a crisis. There's all these crises that they're facing that literally will happen, are happening now, even before they are adults.
Yeah.
Greta isn't even a, what you call, in America, a legal adult yet, but she's already facing a pandemic and facing, climate crisis, and facing all of these things that she's gonna have to deal with as she gets older, and we don't even know how long, we have. I always get a little, little cautious about saying how much time we have, because I think it's going to be depending on where you are as a country, as an individual, but how much time does our species have to thrive, relatively
And the
speaking?
thing is, it's not really just about, the final extinction. It's about the fall of civilization. So you can't just say, how much time do we have? People always say, and I'm sure you get these questions all the time, Nick, from your listeners and different people that follow you. They say, well, how much time do we have? And that's a very hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And you can't really answer it definitively. Time for what? But what we're seeing right now, if we just look around us, we see the fall of civilization happening right now. If you have eyes to see it, you can see the whole bloody thing falling apart before your very eyes. And it's going to get progressively worse, and different calamities are going to hit, and people are going to have to deal with it. So I think it's just sort of a rolling catastrophe, getting pecked to death by a million different ducks,
and it's
right?
a stair-step process too. Like we'll have a major decline, and then we maybe a slight recovery, or it stalls out. Then we have another disaster, like you say, happens, or a series of disasters. Then it but it starts off progressive and then accelerates. So it might go from being a small town that's hit repeatedly by hurricanes, and then just doesn't recover, it's abandoned, and then it turns into a big region or a city or whatever, where people just leave. You saw sort of I always like to use Hurricane Katrina as a good preview of what it looks like.
I was just going to say
during
Louisiana.
the future, when because I think they lost a congressional seat because they lost so many people that moved out of Louisiana, in 2005, 2006, hundreds of thousands of people left, and New Orleans recovered somewhat. It's still a functional city, but what's it going to be in 10 years when the waters
people are
rising?
leaving. People are leaving Louisiana because of the water rise, sea level rise is happening there. So
so I mean, everything's progressive but accelerating at the same time, and that stair step collapse is happening. It's right there in front of us, and we're experiencing it in real time.
That's right. And we'll be experiencing it in various ways the rest of our lives. And that's basically going to be our new definition of reality, is this rolling collapse, kind of cyclical collapse. And some years will be good, and a lot of people will think, oh, thank God, that's over with. Like the last time we were finished with the El Nino in 98, that was a huge El Nino, and then the La Nina set in, and of course the La Nina is the cooling phase, and then people saw it sort of leveled out for a while, and people had kind of a false positive, and they thought this thing was sort of over, but it's not. It's just
only
kind of
the beginning.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
That's
should we go
right.
back to more graphs? You want to go through them because they're so nice?
Yeah.
All right, let's go back. I've got the third
Absolutely.
one up, which is the Arctic sea ice with the extent, and it's got the this is the one with the dates. Make sure they're not cut off, and this is the one with current year median, 2 standard deviations, 10
It's
to
kind of
90th percentile.
It's kind of striped. It's got colors, and it's got a yellow center, and then it's got purple on either side. Now, what are those things? You know, the yellow center. Well, the yellow center is the actual median from 1981 to 2010. It's a 30-year rolling average. That's what type of graph this is. And then the one standard deviation is the kind of like lighter purple area, right? Closest to the yellow line. And then the 2 standard deviations is the sort of grayish purple, the bigger one. And we are the thing to notice here is that 2020 is well outside 2 standard deviations, which means there's nothing in this that is by chance, right? This is happening, and this is happening because of climate change and global warming right before our very eyes. So that's what's interesting about that one.
Yeah, it's spreading. The years of these bad years are statistically falling well outside the rest of the data set. Which means that, and it's a part of the data set, so it means that the ice is actually, it's really starting to accelerate in its collapse year by year, far beyond the rest of the data for 1981 to 2010. Wow. And far below the median. This fits in the pattern that we've seen for years, where the sea ice is rapidly declining. You look at it over multiple years to decades, it's rapidly dropping.
It really is.
I'll move to
Sandy,
the next
do you want to?
one.
Yeah.
The Arctic Basin
And this
sea
is-
ice. Dr. Labe is now a postdoc I went on Twitter and congratulated him. He's like
Yay, Zach.
yeah, absolutely. And going south, if you have any graphs that are pertinent, you know what? Drop it in the messenger and I'll pull it up. He's with us, and he does a marvelous job on his graphs too. Oh my God, he's like, thank you.
He's wonderful.
Torstein.
We love
Yes.
Torstein so
yeah,
much.
we have to give him a shout out.
We definitely have to give Torstein a shout out. So yay, Torstein. So this Arctic Basin sea ice, the interesting thing about this is that, again, it's a different way of looking at it. It's not median, it's year by year by year, and it's color coded. So the 80s are in the dark purple, the 2000s, up until like the 90s to the 2000s are in the medium purple. And then in the lightest color, kind of like the white, is up until the present day, with us being the big red line. And again, we're at record low. And that's what's interesting to notice about this. This is a compilation of all the Arctic seas and how it's doing in all of the Arctic seas. So this is the Beaufort, the Chukchi, the East Siberian, the Laptev, and the Central Arctic Sea. So it's I think it's a very, very compelling way to look at it. Almost looks 3D the way it's shaded, in that.
Patrick McNulty, you know Patrick McNulty, right? He says, stop saying it can't be solved when the energy exists to solve it. He's talking about his own tech. It's Patrick. Okay, we're not sitting here saying it can't be solved. It's pretty bad, though. And we would hope by now that maybe somebody would have recognized your contributions, but it's not happening. That's the problem.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
we know about Patrick's technology that he has invented, which is the ocean tunnels. And it's a remixing. I mean, I'm not a non-believer, but I kind of am, because this problem is so big. And in order to get this ocean tunnel situation where you're transporting water from the coolest, deepest part of the ocean into the top at any quantity that's going to make any difference, in the end, we're still adding endless heat to the system, and the whole ocean's going to get hot anyway. So I can't see it solving this problem. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just wanted to shout him out because I know that he's very passionate, and so are so many of the other people. I've been taken to watching these eco-modernists and techno-utopian, but the eco-modernists, it's interesting. And, in the position I'm here, I need to learn all of this stuff. And the eco-modernists, I was watching an astrophysicist talking, and I think I put it up. I might have put it up on the guy that runs this eco-modernist podcast, Gabe Iglesias, I think his name is. They're very nuclear oriented, pro-nuclear energy. It's the clean energy, but nobody ever talks about degrowth. Nobody ever talks about not being business as usual. And they were talking about mining asteroids, Okay, mining asteroids, the expense of mining asteroids, it's crazy, but it's not to them, and they think we'll be mining asteroids, bringing all those spoils back to Earth, but destroying Earth is still going to happen. It's not going to stop. No. Growth is not going to stop, but it's still interesting to watch these people.
Okay. It is. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Turning it back to you.
Well, I would just add that, the idea of, the prevailing idea of civilization is to always grow, and that does, you must grow, otherwise you collapse.
Yeah, and it's
so
crazy.
That's what they're, and so there's actual like scale for civilizations, like type 1, type 2, type 3 civilizations that involve harnessing all of the energy of your planet, harnessing all the energy of your parent star, harnessing all the energy of your parent galaxy. Type 3. It's crazy, but those are concepts that are in the human mind and science and everything else. You must always be growing. Otherwise, what are you doing? What's the point of being a human and being civilization? You just collapse, and then the idea is you might exist in a lesser state, or you don't exist at all. Well, we might be facing what we're facing right now is the challenge that some would say a challenge, others would say inevitable, that we're in fact facing our own pollution and our own destruction, trying to get to the point of harnessing all of this energy and all this power, but all of the waste that produces and all of the damage that's producing may very well destroy us in the process. We're trying to harness all the energy of our planet, but in the process, we're generating all these greenhouse gases. We're destroying all these forests. We're killing off all of these species. And so how do you continue to grow when you're hitting these barriers where the stuff that you need to survive as a species, you're destroying in order to grow as a species? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. So,
Well, it's capitalism itself and our set of living conditions itself that's killing us, and our drive and our selfishness and our consumption and our population growth. It's the whole thing put all together. For, a million years or two, humanity existed. Of course, humanity was much smaller, but when we were hunter-gatherer types, not too much farming, and there weren't too many of us, and not too many of us really lived long lives that we're living now. actually. It was much more sustainable, and I think it really began several thousand years ago when farming first became a thing, and it's just been slowly growing. And then I guess, within the last, 200 or 300 years, things have really taken off. And that was really the burning of coal and the Industrial Revolution, finding this new great power source that we thought was going to solve all of our problems, and which has been the source of all of our ills, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that show's over, Jen. You just said it all. Well, you want to go back to graphs because these are great, and I want to give Dr. Zach his due because I share this with him, and I hope he knows that people are out here using his stuff. I mean, I'm sure he knows, but which one did you want to go to, Jen? Oh, the regional Arctic ice.
The regional Arctic sea ice, and this gives. Now, this is a little bit more of a complex graph, but this is at the detail level, at the sea level, how the ice extent, not the ice volume, but just the ice extent, is doing over time compared to other years. And you can see several of the seas, in particular the Kara Sea and the Laptev Sea, and of course Hudson Bay, they're flatlining out and they're well out of the normal pattern. Whenever you see black between the turquoise blue line and the purple area at the bottom, then you know that you're out of the pattern and things are changing very quickly. So in particular, the Laptev Sea is the one on the lower right-hand corner. And that has bottomed out. And we alluded to this in a show a couple of weeks ago, I think, Sandy, about the Laptev Sea in particular.
Yes, was that with Jim?
The Laptev Sea, with Jim Massa, correct. Yeah. And the Laptev Sea has basically flatlined. It's bottomed out and it's ice free. And the other thing about the Laptev Sea is the ice is not forming again. And this is an area where ice typically forms when you get to have this, time of year, October, the sea ice starts forming again. So far, the Laptev Sea is completely ice free. What do you think about this, Nick?
It's just the East Siberian Sea looks bad too. And it's just a matter of the waters got so warm that it takes time for the cool of the waters before you can get new ice to form, and that's basically what's happening. I mean, I think the Laptev had this problem last year or 2 years ago too, where it took forever for it to cool. Once it reached that point of the freezing point, that ice reformed pretty quickly. It shot up like a rocket pretty quick, but for a while it just would not form, and that's seems to be the situation once again for the Laptev Sea, just not forming.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Nick. And this purple area, just to let you guys know, this is the 2 standard deviation area, meaning that anything within it is within the range of normality, even if low. Anything actually skirting along the black, as the Laptev Sea is doing, is on a whole new pattern. And this is the Atlantification of the Arctic. That's what they call it. That's what's happened in the Barents Sea, and now that's extending into the Laptev Sea, the East Siberian Sea, and the Kara Sea as well. All those seas are pretty well ice-free and having a really hard time reforming their ice.
Gosh. And you just, but what gets me is that nobody, people, the normal normies don't understand what's coming from this. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? Should people understand so they could prepare, or will they panic and buy toilet paper?
Panic and buy toilet paper. Guaranteed. I mean, if this hits, at some point, this understanding is going to hit the mass consciousness. Right now, it's still pretty well kind of fogged out, and the average Joe is not seeing this. It's still sort of a controversial, bleeding edge sort of thing that we're talking about, but not for long, Sandy. Really, seriously. The Arctic sea ice is dying. This is very sad, and it's very dangerous, and it means a big change is coming for our world.
Well, going south says once you go Atlantic, you can't go back. And another thing is when people will start listening to people like Jim McHenry also, who's out there every Friday in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania with his wife Tanya when she goes, and he is doing a climate change. People should join him, but he is speaking the truth. His videos, everything. There's more and more of us, and we're not conspiracy theorists. We are science following people. We are telling the truth.
Exactly.
But we just have to keep doing it. So where do you want to go next? Where do you want to go next?
I think that there's a couple. There's a lot more graphs. Nick, what's your feeling? Do you want to go through some more of these graphs, or do you want to move on?
If you scroll down past there's the Arctic sea ice change ones. Scroll past those.
Okay.
There's the Arctic
change.
sea ice annual minimum.
Oh, here we go. Got it.
Yeah, Arctic sea ice annual minimum.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting one.
Yeah, I mean that shows you where 2020 is compared to 2012, 2019, 2016. It's pretty low. Yeah.
Look at where the red line is right now. We're out of the 2012 minimum, which had been thus far the lowest, as we've said time and time again. And look where 2020 is ending over on the right-hand side so far, mid-October. And we're kind of, what's scary about this graph, Nick, when I look at it, is the shape. Do you see that thing? It kind of goes like that.
Yeah, it actually dipped a little bit,
and that thing should not be pointing I don't know, looking at it whichever way y'all are looking at it, but it should not be pointing like that or like that. It should be pointing like that. And the declination of that Arctic sea ice for right now, the red one, it's wrong. It shouldn't look like that's abnormal.
Really? Yeah. Really. So Jennifer and Nick, let me ask a question before we go on. Where, if this is happening up in the Arctic, it's affecting the indigenous people that are up there. They're moving already from their homes. They're building homes. Where do you see the indigenous population? What are they going to do? Is it just going to be moving inward? Is it just going to keep building? They're going to keep rebuilding homes with stilts. What do you think?
The problem is the permafrost, right, Nick?
Yeah.
They can't move inward. They can't just get away from the sea, where the ice surrounding their villages has melted. They can't, their traditional walrus or seal or whatever it was that they hunted. It's not just a matter of moving inward, because more than likely, most of these indigenous folks live on the permafrost, and the permafrost itself is giving way and caving and melting and giving off gases and all sorts of things. So
I imagine
where do they go?
I imagine a lot of them are probably going to move. Everyone's talking about moving north. They might have to move south and go live in the cities and in their, which of course. Threatens their cultures. They want to have a traditional culture. It's going to be hard to have if they're moving to Anchorage or Juneau or somewhere where there's more solid ground. And
how about in Russia, the Siberians?
Yeah, and if you're a reindeer herder or a sea hunter, so a seal hunter or something like that, how in the world are you going to live in a city? How are you going to possibly live in Juneau or some of these places? These people, for thousands of years, they've been doing this. This is their culture. This is what they do. And they're not really equipped. They'd be driven into poverty. I don't think the government's going to support them.
Well, I think that's something we should think about doing in the future is, looking or maybe having someone on that can talk to us about their living situation up there. I'm always interested in the indigenous populations. They're getting hurt by no fault of their own,
Yeah. So sad.
It's a sign of what's happening all around the world too. There are people that did not contribute to climate change or the other ecological damage that's resulting. That's why I like over population is only a piece of the puzzle when it comes to our crisis that we're facing, because not all populations are equal, and obviously some populations have been far more at fault for the destruction of the planet than others.
So
it's not
people
just a
like
matter
me shouldn't procreate. Well, I'm too old, but they look like me. Don't
I
procreate.
Always encourage people. I always encourage people to be non-breeders, and if you've bred already, encourage your children to be non-breeders.
like mine, who I always say, she said, "Mom, I'm not a breeder" at 16, and that's it. 32.
That's part of it's part of the reason that we're only gonna have. I mean, I have one child, where you have kind of a one-child policy now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Wouldn't hurt. All right, so let's see what other lovely little graphs we have. Are we done with the annual minimum? We have the annual maximum, if either one of you want to do this one.
Yeah. Well, you can see that, 2020 again is into the record low level, and the maximum did not get anywhere near the maximum from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, or the 2010 mean, that's kind of rounded. It did for a little bit get above the 2010 mean, but that very quickly by early, let's say late March, it dropped right out and it's cutting its own track. So again, this is just evidence that the Arctic is shriveling before our very eyes, and it's the trend that we have to kind of keep track of, and this trend is irrevocable, marching towards an ice-free Arctic.
Yeah, I think it seems like a pretty safe bet that we're gonna probably start to see like ice-free conditions in September, like for weeks at a time by the early 2030s. I mean, we'll get it for like a day or a week, probably sometime in the next, sometime in the 2020s. But by the 2030s, it's going to be there because it's getting precipitously worse, and eventually that 2012 record is going to get blown out of the water. I mean, it's going to happen pretty soon. I mean, I'm surprised it's lasted this long. I think most people are, but it got pretty close this year. So yeah,
absolutely.
All right, well, let's see, we have a couple more, but then you know what else we have, Jennifer? We have some graphics that Jennifer took, and if we're finished with the graphs, I think what we're going to do is Jennifer took some unbelievable pictures of her home in Colorado, and I want to pull these up, and I'm going to pull these up, Jennifer, and I'll let you and Nick talk about this.
To be clear, this is not pictures of my home, but pictures of the fires.
I'm sorry.
So the fires in Colorado are record level. We're currently experiencing the worst fire in Colorado's history. It's burned untold hundreds of thousands of acres. And yesterday, when I went to the grocery store, which is only about a mile away, so this is like Saturday afternoon, I took a trip to the grocery store and I was looking over to the west. The mountains are about 10 miles from my house. And I saw this huge, gigantic plume of smoke. And I'm like, holy crap. Where did that come from? And it was just like 10, maybe 15 miles away along the Continental Divide. And so I went and I did my shopping. I came out, drove home. And as I drove into my development, I looked to the west and it was just disgorging. I mean, just absolutely ginormous. And our background tonight, I'm going to get out of the way briefly so you can see it, but this is a picture of the sun and how it looked. So you can see I'm just getting out of the way so they can kind of see my green screen, right? Yeah. And that basically, that's how the sun has looked for days on end here. But yesterday it was truly apocalyptic. I had never personally, except on TV, seen live, a fire this big. It looked like a freaking nuclear bomb had gone off, and it was so strange and apocalyptic, and just like strange smoke and ash falling everywhere. And this is what's happening, throughout the West in the United States. Absolutely stunning and scary also.
Nick, I have a question for you about what's coming up. We're looking at, Colorado, and we're looking at that and these pictures Jennifer took. Look at that smoke plume. Yeah. My question is, what is next for Australia? I mean, are they going into their fire season? I mean, is this going to now happen? It's happening in California. It's happening in the West. What's going to happen with our friends in Australia?
Well, it is going to be going into summertime there, so in spring now in the southern hemisphere. So yeah, it could very well be more issues with fire there. They tend to get during the La Nina pattern that we're having. They tend to get more warm weather in the eastern part of Australia. And if I remember correctly, a little wetter weather pattern in southeast Australia. So maybe that'll help with the fire, help limit the fire situation in parts of Australia and southeast Australia. But I mean, when every month and almost every year is a near record warm year, areas that do dry out just are tending to have bigger fires. And I mean, in Colorado and much of the West is very dried out.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, very dry, very dry. Yeah.
I mean, the wet gets wetter, the dry gets drier, and all throughout the world, there are record levels of rain. I work with a bunch of Indian guys from Hyderabad, and they are having a hard time communicating with me because all the infrastructure is getting completely soaked, right? Hyderabad, India.
God.
And I don't know if you all have seen some pictures of the floods in Hyderabad, but it's unfreaking believable. And so you have way too much water some places as the atmosphere is moister and just dumping itself. And then places like where I live and in California, it's parched, it's bone dry. And you just can't believe how dry it is. And you just pray for rain, Both situations are very difficult.
Yeah.
And both of them are abrupt as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to climate change, you're getting increasing extremes, not only in individual locations. So one location gets, all this intense heavy rain in one year, and then the next year it's bone dry. But you're getting those intense gradients of extremes between different parts of the planet. So one area of the planet is getting parched, another area of the planet is getting absolutely deluged with water. The hurricane season has been or typhoon season has been somewhat muted in the Western Pacific, although some areas have still gotten pretty good storms and rains in the typhoon season, whereas the Atlantic is just hyperactive, crazy with Greek names.
Well, I pulled up those pictures, Jennifer, I pulled them up of Hyderabad. It's right here.
Oh, did you?
I pulled them up. Yeah, I got an article. It's tragic, these pictures. These people are, if you can see it, these people are in water up to their shoulders. Oh, my gosh.
The whole city is just flooded. It's unbelievable. And I know from talking to these guys, they're like, we say, speak up. And they're like, I'm sorry, I can't. The internet's going out, and then boop, they'll lose their VPN connection or something will have happened. It's impacting our work, and our meetings because, the weather and the wetness and all the infrastructure is just soaked, all the wiring and stuff,
That's really something. Those pictures were really something, and it's just and
there's been a lot of rain in parts of India and Africa too. And I mean, Africa is like crazy with their extremes. Like they're getting areas that are just in parched drought, and then some areas are just getting deluged with rain. They're having their own like climate change issues with drought and fire versus wet and flood, and
Well, guys, we're going on an hour, and I'm wondering if you want to take some questions. I have asked the chat, and there are some questions that have the 2 question marks, which is what I asked. And don't forget, guys, click like. I don't know why it helps something. I don't know. We're not monetized, but what do you think? Should we do some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's one from Aaron. How long do you think the U.S. food production will hold out after the first blue ocean event?
That's a good question for
Yeah.
Nick. Nick, you live in the heartland.
Short answer, it's impossible to know. Longer answer is it depends on just how much chaos the food producing areas can handle. And I mean, I actually just happened to see a story a short time ago saying that there was $7.5 billion in damage caused by that derecho that hit Iowa and Illinois in August. Just wiped out the crops in those areas, and so I mean it's hard to know because there's the grains that they grow, and then there's storage, and then there's other things related to the way it's
and there's
transported.
There's 2 types of food too, right, Nick? I mean, there's grain, and a lot of that grain feeds cows and livestock. But don't ever forget there's the Central Valley in California, and that Central Valley is more vulnerable than people realize. And Paul Beckwith has been putting out some great videos about the great California flood that's going to happen. That Central Valley does flood from time to time. And if that Central Valley floods, I don't know exactly the percentage, but it's most of the vegetables, the almonds, the avocados, all of like the vegetable type things, not the grains particularly, but everything else. Most of it's grown in the Central Valley in California, very, very fertile spot. And that thing is very prone to flooding.
Yeah.
So don't get used to your olives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That area's been dealing with increasing heat from the global warming. I mean, that area of California has been getting hotter and hotter. Getting a lot of like triple-digit heat days in the Central Valley increasingly, to get a what we call an atmospheric river, just the intense stream of tropical moisture into California, and get that historic level flood event for Central Valley. That would be absolutely devastating. That would just be on top of what they already deal with heat, drought, and everything else periodically.
Now, how long would the U.S. food production last after a blue ocean event when the Arctic sea ice goes? It's difficult to say, but one thing we can say for sure is that the weather systems and the jet stream and what's left of it is going to go really haywire after the Arctic sea ice goes, and everything is going to change after that. Now, if you're scared of being hungry, which everybody is, I recommend that anyone who kind of wants to just put their mind at ease, purchase these emergency food kits. They have like a 30-year shelf life. And that way, if something does happen and, the grains do go away, and, life can be worse than a shortage of toilet paper, right? It could be a shortage of rice, corn, wheat, bread, all
next
sorts
year,
of things, vegetables.
I'm going to grow grains next year. If there is a next year.
Oh, my
goodness,
let's segue. Sandy. I'd love to see you out with your thresher.
Well, let me tell you, I'm not out with much. Today was a work day for Doug and Greg, his buddy. I mean, today they loaded all the wood on the deck, and they the last thing to bring in is the Brussels sprouts. But anyway, we're not talking there. I did that the other night. I have a question from One Shot Therano. With current situation in Brazil rainforest, how do you assess the effect on the USA? That's a good question. Thank you, One Shot.
That's a real good question. Do you
Nick,
want to take a
stab?
shot at that?
I don't.
Sure. I'm not exactly sure.
That's a good inner
Yeah.
relationship to figure out, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a show.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly think of the effects down there for that region in terms of like the destruction of wildlife and the change in climate in response, the feedback pattern of destroying the rainforest. It becomes savanna and open plains and dries out, and you lose a lot of rainfall in the region. But I'm not sure the effect so much for the United States.
Okay. I've got another one. Nick from Rich Diana. And by the way, thank you, Rich. Rich was one of the people that donated for our better internet connection, which will be happening soon. Thank you, Rich. Nick, how long is the lag from the time the emissions are released to the time they reach their maximum heating effect? I've heard anything from 10 to 30 years.
That's pretty much what I've heard too. There's sort of an envelope of uncertainty involved in trying to estimate how long it takes for the sort of the maximum heating impact on the climate of the carbon dioxide emissions. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've heard, 10 to 30 years. I usually say just for the heck of it, 30 years, just to sort of understand just how much impact what we're doing now has on the future. But I have heard somewhere in the range of 10 to 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing that's scary about that, I just want to add into that, is if it's 10 to 30 years, okay, so do the math. Now we're in 2020, minus 30 is 1990. What that would mean is that we are now living or reaping the fruits or whatever of the carbon dioxide that was emitted from 1990, 2000, possibly 2010. What that means is that our trajectory is already baked in. And even if we completely reduce carbon dioxide today, which is not happening because it keeps going up so exponentially, you still have to pay for your karma, from the past, right?
Yeah. I mean, basically 2040 to 2050 is set in. I mean, it's our future, and obviously, supposedly, if we change what we do now, then beyond 2060 we could have an effect. But we have to think about all the feedbacks that are being activated by the processes by the emissions that we're doing now as well, and that whole process of emissions and heating that's occurring over this next 20 to 30 years. Yeah, I mean, what's happening in the next 20, 30 years, that's set in stone.
It's pretty heavy. Wow, we're going on an hour, 9 minutes. Let's see what else. Well, Kevin Hester said, Kevin's been here with us the whole time. He says, losing the remaining Arctic sea ice and its ability to reflect incoming solar energy back to space would be equivalent to adding 1 trillion tons of CO2 to the atmosphere, according to Scripps. Wow. He did have a follow-up comment, but I have to find it. Any more questions out there? I've been putting up comments. Oh, yeah, here. He said, further to my comment above, at current rates, this roughly equates to 25 years of global CO2 emissions.
Absolutely. And the one word we haven't mentioned thus far this show, mysteriously enough, because we've been focusing on the Arctic sea ice, is the methane monster and the implications of the methane monster erupting and coming out. It's already coming out, and it's going to be exponential. As the Arctic sea ice goes away, there's going to be very low albedo, and that ocean is going to get very hot, and thus the methane hydrate is going to just, that ice cage is going to melt, and the methane's going to be coming out even more. Even today, there are methane fountains that are going off up in the Arctic Sea, especially in the Laptev Sea, the Kara Sea, the Chukchi Sea, the East Siberian Shelf. All through there are methane fountains that are just pouring right into the atmosphere. And it's important to realize that methane is a super, super powerful greenhouse gas.
Yeah,
especially when it's first emitted. So that in itself is a feedback. So thanks, Kevin, for that observation.
Yes, Kevin, thank you. Well, guys, I think we're going to bid adieu. It's an hour and 11 minutes. I'll give a couple comments here. Joey is from Australia. He says poorest countries have been suffering as long as I can remember. In the 80s, were the poor countries suffering due to climate change? On the upside, people are still alive in those places. Wow, that's something. Trish says Methane Monster sounds like a new dance. We're gonna dance.
I want to give a big shout out. Can I give a big shout out?
Absolutely to Trish.
I want to give a big shout out to Trish, Wisconsin Trish Kaiser. So she sent us some little goodies, right? So I don't know if you can see this, but this says busy making a fucking difference. These are my busy making a fucking difference socks. Thank you very much, Trish.
She's wonderful.
And she sent it to Sandy and I. And we then got soap in a coat. So we've got kind of wool covered soap for little scrubbies. And then Sandy and I both got pot holder mittens. And mine says, "You want a piece of this?"
And mine says, "Bitches get stuff done." Yes, this bitch has to get stuff done.
Shout out to Trish Kaiser, Wisconsin Trish, for being such a pivotal member of our climate community.
Absolutely.
We love you so much.
I got it in the mail and it made me cry. I felt so so cared for. Yes.
And a cute little card too. So
she
sweet.
said, "Oh girls, you are making me blush."
We are. Well, she wrote a nice little card and she said it just made us feel good. And then the donations, we were able to get a signal booster, and I'm getting the signal booster for the channel in one show. So that is
great.
That is like amazing, and hopefully that'll help, and it'll be I know that somebody had said to me, well, where is that crap made that you're getting with that signal booster and all that? And at this point, what am I going to say? I do this, and what are we going to do? Just say goodbye now? No, we're going to talk till the very freaking end. I am. So I want to thank everybody, because it was an amazing thing to be able to realize that people are out there and care about all of us. Nick, Jennifer, Tony, and Jim is now part of the crew, and Jonathan, who does the Facebook page, the editor. Jonathan O. And there's Mindy, and there's Judy, and what a team! What a great thing here.
It's a fabulous community. Yeah, and I'm so grateful for you and Environmental Coffee House, Sandy, for putting this together and giving us a platform where we can come and share and speak and build community. Community is very important.
And that's how we started, with Nicholas. Yeah. With Nicholas's piece show. I'm going to pull it up. I'll pull Nicholas's piece. Oh, no, I put it down. I can't pull it up. But Nicholas's piece, everybody, and there'll be a link to Nick's Patreon when I finish updating. There'll be a link for that, because, Nicholas, he does for us what we can't do for us. He looks at all this material as a meteorologist and gives us ideas. He shares articles on his Facebook, but the Patreon's really good, and I want to thank you. And Trish said, can I have Kevin Hester on? Well, guess what? I had Kevin Hester on, I think it was 2017, and I asked him tonight. It's up to him.
We should have him on.
Yes,
Kevin, I'm going to ask you right now, if you'd like to come on with us on Environmental Coffee House, we would love to have you. Yes. I haven't talked to you in the longest time, but about, oh golly, was this 4 years ago now? I had the opportunity to spend 2 weeks with Kevin in his house in Rakino Island, and he took me all around the North Island of New Zealand, and we gave talks, gave interviews, had an amazing time. So big shout out to Kevin Hester. He's one of the pivotal members of our climate community. So
yes,
thank you so much,
we
Kevin.
Love you.
We appreciate you.
Yep. Okay, he says, yeah, I'll come back on board. I've changed my mind, because earlier he was telling me he needs to chill, and sit back from all this, but he'll come on with
whenever
us.
He's ready.
Yep,
Whenever
and
he's
maybe the signal booster will allow us to have more people on at once. Then we won't see just the Skype face, like it's pops in and out. We'll see. I'm hoping. Yes, everybody loves you. Everybody loves you. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you, Nicholas. As always, I like to give everybody a last little thing to say. And Jen, you want to go first, and we'll give Nick can follow up and say goodnight.
Oh, absolutely. Well, obviously we're living in the most pivotal time that we've ever encountered as a human species. And we're watching this great extinction event unfold before our very eyes. And we're watching so many other things too. It's not just the climate, it's everything that's happening in our world. If you made a sci-fi movie about 2020 and just called it 2020, if you hadn't lived it yourself, you would say, well, that's a good movie, but it's just a bit too much. They're dealing with the virus, they're dealing with the crazy president, they're dealing with the fall of civilization, the collapse of the economy, all sorts of strange, abrupt climate change events and global warming and the melting of the Arctic sea ice. Nice try, guys, but just a little too far-fetched to believe. But here we are, and we're living it.
Nick? Round it up, Nick. Do the roundup. Oh, yeah, you can. Yeah. Well, what would you like people to know about what you're going to be doing and things like that?
Well, as far as what I'm doing, I'm continuing to talk about these issues to the best of my ability and communicate them, and I hope that people, even though they're worried about the future, still try to live their lives, with as much happiness and urgency as they can possibly have. So I think that's really the most important thing to do. Because you don't know what's going to get you. It could be some random abrupt climate change type event. It could be COVID-19.
I could fall down my steps. Anything can happen.
Fall down your steps.
My gosh. Who likes to think of this?
But we're still, until that day comes, you're still here and try to enjoy whatever life. Because whether you're in privileged America or you're in another country, that's all people are trying to do, is trying to live their lives to their fullest.
And everybody's like that with
and
us
Sandy,
in the chat.
Somebody wants to say good night to y'all.
Good night, little kitty. My 5 never want to come in when I'm in here. They're all sitting out with their daddy, Doug. I don't know. He has a thing about animals. They'll like to lay all over him. Well, anyway. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. 1 minute and 19. I'm the clock watcher. Peace. I will be, I think, Tuesday night. Usually we do Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, and Sunday nights. Sometimes it's hard for me. As you all know, I'm pretty disabled in my spine. But we do our best. And so look forward to next Sunday. And look forward to us being able to shove a whole bunch of squares on the screen, I hope. All right. Nighty-night. I'm going to play the ending so you guys can just talk. And thank you, Jen, and thank you, Nick. And I love you both so much.
Love you too, Sandy.
Love you too.
Love you, Nick.
Love you.
Bye, guys.